What happens when rock bottom comes with a mortgage? For Rebecca Taylor and her 2 children, their fresh start looked like this: peeling paint, a sagging porch, and more problems than one mother with a broken heart and empty bank account could possibly handle. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. 6 months after signing her divorce papers, Rebecca Taylor stood in the pouring rain, staring at what was supposed to be her salvation. A 1930s craftsman home in her childhood hometown, the place she hadn't lived in for 20 years. The real estate listing had used words like charming and full of character. What it should have said was neglected and on the verge of collapse. Sophie, 14, artistic and withdrawn since the divorce, refused to even look at their new home. And 10-year-old Noah's excitement about a new adventure had just transformed into visible disappointment. "Well, here we are," Rebecca said with forced cheerfulness, her voice echoing in the empty foyer. Home sweet home. The smell hit them first musty, damp, with a hint of something that had died long ago in the walls. The real estate photos had been strategically cropped and filtered, hiding the water stains that bloomed across the ceiling like yellow flowers. Sophie stepped inside cautiously, her headphones still firmly in place. "I can't believe you made us move here," she muttered, heading straight for the stairs. "I'm finding my room." "Be careful on those stairs," Rebecca called after her. The inspector said they might be. A creak and a crash interrupted her as Sophie's foot went straight through a step. "Mom!" Sophie screamed. Her leg disappeared up to her knee in splintered wood. Noah's eyes widened in fear. "Is the house eating her?" Rebecca rushed to pull her daughter free, splinters catching on Sophie's jeans. "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" Sophie yanked her earbuds out. "This place is a death trap. I hate it here. I hate it." 6 months ago, as Rebecca sat across her lawyer, pen hovering over the divorce papers. "Once you sign, the house goes to him," her lawyer reminded her. "Are you sure you don't want to fight for it?" Rebecca shook her head. "The kids need stability, not parents who are draining their college funds on legal fees. I'll figure something out." That something had come in the form of a phone call from her hometown's real estate agent. A property had come on the market, the old Wilson place, the house that had belonged to her grandmother's best friend, the house where she'd spent countless afternoons as a child. The price was shockingly low, too low, as she was now discovering. That night, the 3 of them huddled in sleeping bags in the barren living room. Rain continued to pour, finding its way through at least 3 separate leaks. Rebecca had placed pots and pans to catch the water, creating an irregular symphony of drips. "Remember when we went camping that time in Yosemite?" Rebecca tried, passing out slices of cold pizza. "This is like that, an indoor camping adventure." Noah nibbled his pizza, except there are no s'mores, and Dad's not here. The words hung in the air like the dust motes visible in the beam of their single working lamp. "Mom," Sophie said quietly, "what happens if we can't fix this place? We don't have anywhere else to go, do we?" Rebecca swallowed hard, pushing back the panic that threatened to overflow. "We'll make it work. This house just needs some love." She forced a smile. "Besides, your great-grandmother used to visit here all the time. This house has good bones and good memories. We just need to find them again." After the kids had finally fallen asleep, Rebecca stepped onto the sagging porch with her phone, trying to find enough signal to make a call. "Megan, it's me. I think I've made a terrible mistake." Her best friend's voice was a lifeline across the miles. "Talk to me, Beck. How bad is it? Remember when I said it needed a little work? I was off by about a century." Rebecca's voice cracked. The inspector clearly took a bribe. "There are structural issues, electrical problems, plumbing disasters. I don't even know where to start. Can you back out? Get your money back? I used everything I had from the divorce settlement. If I walk away now, we have nothing." Rebecca wiped away a tear. "I can't let the kids see me fall apart. Sophie's already barely speaking to me since the divorce, and Noah's trying so hard to be brave." A silence fell between them. "You know what my grandmother used to say," Megan finally offered. "When you can't see the way forward, start by cleaning what's right in front of you." The next morning, Rebecca woke before the kids. She found an old broom in a closet and began sweeping the kitchen. By the time Sophie and Noah stumbled downstairs, she had cleared enough space for their camping stove. "Pancakes," she announced, flipping one with determined cheerfulness. "And I have good news. The water's been turned on, and while the water heater is questionable, we have a functioning bathroom. Sort of." Noah approached the pancakes cautiously. "Are we really going to live here, Mom?" Rebecca nodded. "We are, and we're going to make it amazing. After breakfast, we're going to make a plan." Sophie poked at her pancake. "I have a plan. Call Dad and tell him this was a mistake." Rebecca stiffened. "Your father has moved on, Sophie. He and Carla are starting their new life, and we're starting ours." "We didn't ask for a new life," Sophie shouted. You and Dad ruined everything, and now you've dragged us to this dump. Rebecca felt her control slipping. Sophie, I am doing the best I can. Do you think this is what I planned? Do you think I wanted any of this? The silence that followed was broken only by Noah's small voice. Is that a treehouse out back? Rebecca turned to follow his gaze through the grimy window. Sure enough, nestled in a massive oak tree was the weathered remains of what had once been a child's hideaway. I think it is, Rebecca said, grateful for the distraction. Want to check it out after breakfast? Noah nodded eagerly. As they stood beneath the ancient oak later that morning, Rebecca felt the first genuine smile cross her face. The treehouse was sturdy, far more stable than parts of the main house. Someone had built it with love and skill. Can we fix it up, Mom? Noah asked, already reaching for the ladder. Careful, Rebecca cautioned. Let me check it first. As she climbed the rickety ladder, testing each rung, Rebecca felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. The treehouse was small but solid. It needed new boards, fresh paint, perhaps a real window to replace the cutout square, but it could be saved. Standing in the tiny wooden structure, Rebecca looked out over the yard, overgrown and wild but spacious. Beyond it, she could see the rooftops of the small town where she'd grown up, where everyone knew everyone's business, for better or worse. It's going to be okay up there? Noah called from below. Rebecca looked down at her son's upturned face, so full of hope and trust despite everything they'd been through. Yes, she said with newfound determination. It's going to be okay. That afternoon, Rebecca made a phone call. Hello? Is this Daniel Ortiz? I got your number from the hardware store. I've been told you're the best contractor in town. I have a project, well, more like 100 projects. It's the old Wilson place. There was a low whistle on the other end of the line. The Wilson place? That's been empty for years. What kind of shape is it in? Rebecca laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. Let's just say we're currently using umbrellas indoors. I can come by tomorrow morning to take a look, Daniel offered. But I should warn you, I'm booked with projects for the next few months. I might be able to give you some advice, maybe help with the most urgent issues, but a full renovation. Anything would help at this point, Rebecca admitted. We'll see you tomorrow. That night, as the kids slept, Rebecca pulled out her laptop, connecting to the weak signal from her phone's hotspot. She opened a new document and titled it Operation Resurrection. Beneath it, she began a list. Fix roof, urgent. Repair structural damage to stairs and floors. Update electrical, plumbing issues. Kitchen renovation. Bathroom upgrades. Walls and paint. Landscaping. She stared at the list, the enormity of it making her chest tighten. Then she went to her banking app and looked at the balance, the last of her divorce settlement after the down payment. It wasn't nearly enough. Rebecca opened a new browser tab and typed, How to renovate a house on a shoestring budget. Daniel Ortiz was younger than Rebecca had expected, with capable hands and thoughtful eyes that didn't betray any shock as he walked through the house, though she knew it must be worse than many projects he'd seen. The good news, he said after his inspection, is that the foundation is solid. This house was built right the first time. The bad news is pretty much everything else. They stood in what would eventually be the kitchen. Noah had followed Daniel around like a shadow, hanging on his every word, while Sophie had remained upstairs, exploring the bedrooms. So what's the prognosis, doctor? Can it be saved? Rebecca tried to keep her tone light. Daniel nodded slowly. It can, but it's going to take time, money, and a lot of work. He handed her a notepad with his assessment and rough cost estimates. Rebecca's face must have betrayed her shock at the bottom line. I've broken it down by priority, Daniel added quickly. The roof has to come first. There's no point doing anything else until that's fixed. I can help you source materials, maybe even get some discounts through my connections. And your labor costs? Rebecca asked hesitantly. Daniel glanced at Noah, who was pretending not to listen while examining a loose floorboard. I could work weekends, teach you some basics, so you can do some simpler stuff yourself. That would cut down significantly on cost. Rebecca felt a wave of relief. That would be incredible. Thank you. Mom, Sophie's voice echoed from upstairs. Come up here. You need to see this. Rebecca and Daniel exchanged glances before heading up the precarious staircase. They found Sophie in what would be her bedroom, carefully peeling away layers of faded wallpaper. Look what I found underneath. Behind the floral pattern were pencil sketches directly on the plaster, beautiful drawings of the town as it had looked decades ago, along with notes and dates. One section showed the very house they stood in, labeled Home Sweet Home, 1945. These are amazing, Rebecca breathed, running her fingers over the lines. There's a signature, Sophie pointed. Evelyn W. Evelyn Wilson. Daniel nodded. The original owner. She was quite the local character from what I've heard. My grandfather used to talk about her. She's still alive, Rebecca said. My grandmother's best friend. The real estate agent mentioned she moved to a smaller place in town a few years back. That's why I was drawn to this house. The connection. Sophie was still examining the drawings. These are really good. She was talented. It was the most enthusiasm Sophie had shown about anything since they'd arrived. We should preserve these, Rebecca decided. When we redo this room, we'll leave this wall as is. It's part of the house's story. That afternoon, as Daniel measured the roof for materials, a car pulled up outside. A small, elderly woman with perfectly coiffed white hair made her way carefully up the broken path to the front door. Rebecca opened it before she could knock. Mrs. Wilson? The older woman's eyes crinkled. Rebecca Taylor, look at you. All grown up. I'd recognize those eyes anywhere, just like your grandmother's. Rebecca stepped forward to help her up the porch steps. Please come in, though I should warn you, the house is in rough shape. Mrs. Wilson waved away her concern. I know exactly what shape it's in, dear. I couldn't take care of it properly these last few years. Arthur, that was my husband. He always handled the maintenance. After he passed, things started to fall apart. She looked around the entrance hall with a curious mix of sadness and acceptance. Rather like I did, I suppose. They settled in the living room, where Rebecca had set up a few folding chairs, the only furniture they currently had besides their sleeping bags. I heard you'd bought the place, Mrs. Wilson continued. People talk in small towns, you know. When I heard it was Margaret's granddaughter, well, I had to come see for myself. She fixed Rebecca with a knowing look. You're running from something, aren't you? Just like your grandmother did when she first came to town. Rebecca was taken aback. I didn't know Grandma was running from anything. Mrs. Wilson smiled. Oh yes, Margaret arrived here in 1952 with a broken engagement behind her and not much else. She thought she'd failed at life. Turned out, life was just getting started. She patted Rebecca's hand. This house has seen its share of new beginnings. Sophie appeared in the doorway, hovering uncertainly. And who might this young lady be? Mrs. Wilson asked. This is my daughter, Sophie. Rebecca introduced them. Sophie, this is Mrs. Wilson. She's the one who drew those pictures upstairs. Mrs. Wilson's eyes lit up. You found my drawings? Oh my, I'd forgotten all about those. Arthur was always after me to stop drawing on the walls, but I told him, it's our house. Who's to say we can't decorate it how we please? Sophie stepped forward. They're really good. Did you ever become an artist? In my own small way, Mrs. Wilson replied. I illustrated children's books for years, nothing famous, mind you, but it brought me joy. She studied Sophie. You have an artist's eyes, I can tell. Do you draw? Sophie shifted uncomfortably. I used to. Not much anymore. Mrs. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Well, creative wells run dry sometimes. They fill back up when you're ready. She turned to Rebecca. Now, I didn't just come to reminisce. I've brought you something. She reached into her large handbag and pulled out a worn leather-bound book, The House Diary. Arthur and I recorded everything about this house when we replaced the water heater, what color we painted each room, where we planted bulbs in the garden. I thought it might help you. Rebecca accepted the book with reverence. Thank you. This is invaluable. You'll find your grandmother in there too, Mrs. Wilson added with a twinkle in her eye. She helped us plant the rose garden in '63. And there was the summer of '67 when a tree branch crashed through the upstairs window during a storm, and your grandfather helped Arthur repair it. She rose with some difficulty. I should be going, but I'll be back to check on your progress. This old house deserves people who love it back to life. As Rebecca walked her to the door, Mrs. Wilson paused. It gets better, you know. Whatever you're healing from, the cracks don't disappear, but they become part of your story. After she left, Rebecca opened the house diary, finding entries dating back to 1935 when the house was first built. It was a treasure trove of information: where the water main was located, which windows tended to leak, the composition of the original plaster walls. Mom, Noah called from the backyard. Mr. Ortiz is showing me how to measure for the treehouse repairs. Through the window, Rebecca could see her son following Daniel around the oak tree, clipboard in hand, face serious with concentration. It was the happiest she'd seen him since the divorce. That evening, while the kids were occupied, Rebecca climbed to the attic with a flashlight. The house diary had mentioned storage trunks, and she was curious what might remain. The space was dusty and cramped, filled with cobwebs and the skittering sounds of mice, but in the corner, just as described, sat 3 large trunks. The first contained old clothes and linens, too moth-eaten to salvage. The second held Christmas decorations and photo albums that Rebecca set aside to examine later, but it was the third trunk that made her breath catch. Inside was a collection of letters tied with faded ribbons. and on top, an envelope addressed in her grandmother's handwriting. To Evelyn, my dearest friend. Rebecca sat back on her heels, flashlight balanced between her shoulder and chin as she carefully opened the envelope. My dearest Evelyn, it began. As I prepare to leave this world, I find myself thinking of our sanctuary hours we spent in your kitchen planning adventures, the afternoons in your garden sharing our deepest secrets. Your home has been as much a part of my life story as my own. Perhaps someday, one of my girls will find her way back to it when she needs a safe harbor, just as I once did. Rebecca wiped away tears. Had her grandmother somehow known she would end up here? Had some cosmic force guided her back to this specific house? She gathered the letters and the photo albums and made her way carefully back downstairs. In the living room, she found Sophie scrolling through her phone, the permanent scowl momentarily absent from her face. "What's that?" Sophie asked, noticing the dusty bundle. "History," Rebecca replied, setting down the items on their makeshift coffee table, a large cardboard box turned upside down. "It seems your great-grandmother had a special connection to this house. These are letters she wrote to Mrs. Wilson over the years." Sophie set her phone down, a small miracle in itself. "Can I see?" Rebecca handed her one of the letters, watching as her daughter carefully unfolded the delicate paper. "Evelyn," Sophie read aloud, "sometimes I think we women build our true homes in each other's hearts before we ever lay brick and mortar. Your friendship has been my foundation through the stormiest seasons." She looked up at Rebecca. "That's really beautiful." Rebecca nodded, throat tight with emotion. "Yes, it is." Later that night, after checking that both kids were asleep in their makeshift beds, Rebecca took out her laptop again. On impulse, she opened Instagram and created a new account, at the Wilson House Revival. For the first post, she photographed the exterior of the house at sunset, when the golden light softened its flaws and highlighted its potential. In the caption she wrote, "Day 1 of our journey. This 1930s craftsman house might look abandoned and broken, but it's about to become home for one divorced mom and 2 reluctant kids. Follow along as we renovate this house and maybe ourselves in the process." She hit post without overthinking it, then closed her laptop. Tomorrow they would begin tearing away the damaged parts of the house, making room for what would come next. It felt terrifying and exactly right at the same time. 3 weeks into the renovation, Rebecca stood in what was now clearly a construction zone rather than a home. The roof repairs had begun, with Daniel and his small weekend crew methodically replacing rotted sections. Inside, Rebecca and the kids had torn out damaged drywall and pulled up warped flooring, creating mountains of debris that filled a rented dumpster. The physical labor had been therapeutic for Rebecca. There was something satisfying about smashing through a water-damaged wall with a sledgehammer, something healing about stripping away the old to make room for the new. Her muscles ached in ways they never had during her graphic design career, but it was a good ache, evidence of hard work and progress. Sophie had gradually begun to help, mostly with the careful removal of salvageable elements, original woodwork, vintage doorknobs, the few intact light fixtures. Noah had become Daniel's unofficial apprentice, soaking up construction knowledge like a sponge. Their Instagram account had gained a modest following, mostly friends, former colleagues, and renovation enthusiasts who offered advice and encouragement. Rebecca had found herself looking forward to documenting their progress each evening, capturing small victories like uncovering the original kitchen tiles or discovering an intact stained glass window hidden behind a bookcase. But today, all that progress felt tenuous. Rebecca stared at her laptop screen, trying to make sense of the numbers that refused to add up. The roof was costing more than estimated. The electrical system was in worse shape than they'd thought. And her freelance graphic design work, the income she was counting on to fund the renovation, had slowed to a trickle. "Hey," Daniel's voice interrupted her financial spiral. He stood in the doorway, work gloves in hand. "We've finished the north section of the roof. Want to come see?" Rebecca closed her laptop. "Sure." She followed him outside, squinting up at the new shingles gleaming against the October sky. "It's looking good," Daniel said. "We should finish the rest this week if the weather holds." "About that," Rebecca began hesitantly, "I may need to stretch out the timeline a bit. Financially, things are a little tight right now." Daniel studied her face. "The roof can't wait, Rebecca. Not with winter coming." I know. We'll get the roof done. It's just, everything after that might need to slow down." She sighed. "I thought I'd have more design projects by now, but it's taking time to rebuild my client base here." "What kind of design do you do?" Daniel asked. "Graphic design, logos, websites, branding packages. I was pretty established back in the city, but starting over in a small town is different." She managed a wry smile. "Turns out not many local businesses are looking for a rebrand right now." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Have you talked to Frank down at the hardware store? His website is straight out of 1998. And my sister owns the new coffee shop on Main. She's been complaining about needing marketing materials. Rebecca felt a flicker of hope. Really? Do you think they'd be interested? Worth asking. Small towns work on word of mouth. Once you do one good job, others will follow. He hesitated. And as for the renovation, we could work out a payment plan. Or you could help me with some other projects. Design work for my contracting business in exchange for labor here. Before Rebecca could respond, fat raindrops began to fall. Looks like that storm's moving in early, Daniel observed, glancing at the darkening sky. We should get the tarp secured over the unfinished section. They spent the next hour battling increasingly heavy rain and wind, working to protect the exposed portions of the roof. By the time they finished, both were soaked to the skin. You should head home, Rebecca told Daniel as they stood dripping in the entryway. It's getting bad out there. As if in response, a crack of thunder shook the house, followed by the lights flickering once, twice, then going out completely. Noah appeared from the kitchen, flashlight already in hand. Power's out, Mom? Perfect, Rebecca muttered. Just perfect. I'll check the breaker box before I go, Daniel offered, accepting the flashlight from Noah. Where's your sister? Rebecca asked, peeling off her wet jacket. Noah shrugged. Upstairs with her headphones, probably. Rebecca made her way carefully up the stairs in the dim light. Sophie, we've lost power. No response came from behind Sophie's closed door. Rebecca knocked, then pushed it open to find the room empty. Frowning, she checked the bathroom and the other bedrooms before returning downstairs. She's not up there, Rebecca told Noah, trying to keep the worry from her voice. Did she say she was going somewhere? Noah shook his head. I haven't seen her since lunch. A cold feeling settled in Rebecca's stomach. Sophie, she called, moving from room to room. Sophie, where are you? Daniel returned from the basement. Breaker's fine. It's a neighborhood outage. But we've got another problem. There's water coming in from somewhere. The basement's starting to flood. Rebecca barely registered his words. Sophie's missing. She's not in the house. Maybe she's in the treehouse, Noah suggested. In this storm? But even as Rebecca questioned it, she was already moving toward the back door. It would be just like Sophie to retreat to the half-renovated treehouse, heedless of the weather. The three of them ventured into the downpour, calling Sophie's name. The treehouse was empty, leaves and rain blowing through its open window frame. Could she have gone to a friend's house? Daniel asked, having to shout over the wind. She doesn't have any friends here yet, Rebecca replied, panic rising in her throat. She's made that abundantly clear. They retreated inside, all of them now drenched. Rebecca grabbed her phone, finding it down to 20% battery. I'm calling the police. Just as she was about to dial, the front door burst open and Sophie stumbled in, soaking wet and mud-spattered. Sophie! Rebecca rushed to her. Where were you? We were worried sick. Sophie's face was tear-streaked beneath the rain. I just needed to get out, okay? This house was suffocating me. In the middle of a storm? What were you thinking? Relief was rapidly converting to anger in Rebecca's voice. I was at the library. I just lost track of time and then it started raining and my phone died. Sophie pulled away from Rebecca's reach. Stop treating me like I'm a child. You're 14, Sophie. You are a child, and you can't just disappear without telling anyone where you're going. Like you told us before you decided to move us to this dump. Like you told us before you and Dad decided to get divorced. Sophie's voice cracked. You make all these decisions that ruin our lives, then act like I'm the irresponsible one. Rebecca reeled as if she'd been slapped. The accusation stung all the more because part of her feared it was true. Sophie, that's not fair to your mom, Daniel interjected gently. Stay out of it, Sophie snapped. You're not part of this family. Sophie Taylor, Rebecca admonished. Apologize right now. Why should I? It's the truth. He's just some guy you hired who probably feels sorry for us. Sophie stormed past them toward the stairs. I hate this house. I hate this town. And I hate what our family has become. Her bedroom door slammed, the sound reverberating through the half-demolished house. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by the steady drip of water from multiple leaks that had sprung up during the storm. I'm sorry about that, Rebecca finally said to Daniel, mortification heating her cheeks. Don't be, he replied. Teenagers plus divorce plus renovation. That's a lot for anyone to handle. Noah stood awkwardly nearby, eyes wide and worried. Is Sophie going to be okay? Rebecca put an arm around his shoulders. She will be. We all will. It's just a rough patch. Speaking of rough patches, Daniel said, we should check on that basement flooding before it gets worse. The basement revealed the full extent of the storm's damage. Water was seeping in through the foundation walls and pooling several inches deep on the concrete floor. The ancient water heater stood in the growing puddle, making ominous popping sounds. This isn't good, Daniel said, wading through the water to examine the heater. We need to shut this off before it shorts out completely. As they worked to mitigate the flooding, bringing buckets, towels, and the shop vacuum Daniel had left on site, Rebecca felt a crushing weight of defeat pressing down on her. The house seemed to be fighting back against their renovation efforts, revealing new problems faster than they could solve the old ones. By midnight, the storm had finally passed, though the power remained out. Daniel had stayed to help with emergency measures, but the damage was significant. Water had seeped up through the floorboards in several downstairs rooms. The newly exposed wooden subfloor now warped and stained. We'll assess everything in daylight, Daniel said as he prepared to leave. It might look better once things dry out. But they both knew he was being optimistic. After he left, Rebecca sat alone in the dark kitchen, a battery-powered lantern casting long shadows on the walls. Noah had finally fallen asleep, and Sophie remained barricaded in her room. The house creaked and settled around her, water still dripping from somewhere into a pot she'd placed on the floor. She pulled out her phone, now plugged into her laptop for charging, and opened the camera roll. Scrolling back, she found photos from their previous life. The spacious suburban home with its perfect lawn, the kids smiling at birthday parties, family vacations with her now ex-husband. They looked happy, untroubled. Had it all been an illusion? On impulse, she opened Instagram and began typing, "Tonight, our renovation hit rock bottom. Literally, our basement is flooded, the power is out, and my teenage daughter just told me she hates everything about our new life. Sometimes I wonder if I've made a terrible mistake. Is trying to save this old house just another way of avoiding the truth that some things can't be fixed?" Her finger hovered over the post button. Was she really going to share this vulnerability with strangers? With a deep breath, she pressed post, then set the phone aside. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through windows still streaked with yesterday's rain. Rebecca had fallen asleep at the kitchen table, her neck stiff and aching. The power was still out, and the house felt damp and colder than before. She made her way to the basement stairs, dreading what she would find. The water level had receded slightly, but left behind a layer of silt and debris. The water heater was definitely dead, another major expense she hadn't budgeted for. As she stood surveying the damage, footsteps approached behind her. "Is it bad?" Sophie's voice was quiet, all the anger from the previous night drained away. Rebecca turned to find her daughter standing on the stairs, looking small and uncertain in her oversized sweater. "It's not great," she admitted, "but it's fixable." Sophie nodded, coming to stand beside her mother. "I'm sorry about last night. I shouldn't have said those things." Rebecca put an arm around her shoulders, surprised when Sophie didn't pull away. "Some of what you said was true. I did make decisions that affected your life, without giving you much choice. I'm sorry for that part. You didn't choose the divorce, though, did you?" Sophie asked, her voice small. "Dad did, because of her." Rebecca hesitated. She'd been careful not to vilify her ex-husband to the children, even when his affair with his much younger colleague had been the catalyst for their split. "Relationships are complicated, Sophie. But no, I didn't choose for our family to break up." Sophie leaned against her mother slightly. "I don't really hate it here. Not all of it, anyway." "No?" Rebecca smiled faintly. "What parts don't you hate?" "The drawings on my wall, Mrs. Wilson. The way you can see so many stars at night." She paused. "The treehouse has potential too, I guess." It wasn't much, but it felt like a significant peace offering. "What are we going to do about all this?" Sophie gestured at the flooded basement. Rebecca took a deep breath. "First, we're going to have breakfast. Then we're going to make a list, and then we're going to figure it out one problem at a time." As they turned to head back upstairs, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a notification. She glanced down to see dozens of responses to her late-night Instagram post messages of encouragement, advice about flood damage, and even offers of help from local followers who recognized the Wilson house. One comment in particular caught her eye. "Every renovation has a moment when you want to give up. That's usually right before the breakthrough. Hang in there. Evelyn W." Mrs. Wilson was on Instagram? Rebecca hadn't even known the elderly woman owned a computer. The simple message brought tears to her eyes, not of despair this time, but of gratitude. Perhaps they weren't as alone in this as she'd feared. "What is it?" Sophie asked, noticing her mother's expression. Rebecca showed her the phone. "It seems we have more support than I realized." By afternoon, the extent of the storm damage had become clear in the harsh light of day. Beyond the basement flooding, a section of the newly repaired roof had been compromised. Several windows were leaking, and the yard had turned into a muddy swamp. The power remained out, with the electric company estimating restoration by evening. Rebecca sat at the kitchen table, calculator in hand, trying to figure out how to stretch their limited budget to cover these new disasters. No matter how she juggled the numbers, they came up short. A knock at the door interrupted her calculations. She opened it to find Daniel, and behind him, a small group of people she didn't recognize. "Hope you don't mind the company," Daniel said. "Word got around town about the storm damage. These folks wanted to help." A middle-aged woman stepped forward. "I'm Linda from the hardware store, Frank's wife. We brought some fans to help dry things out once the power's back." She gestured to a truck parked in the driveway, loaded with equipment. An older man in overalls introduced himself next. "Jim Peterson. I do plumbing work when these young fellas get stumped." He nodded toward Daniel. "Thought I'd take a look at your water heater situation." One by one, the neighbors introduced themselves. A retired contractor, a landscape designer, a high school woodshop teacher. People Rebecca had never met but who had seen her Instagram posts or heard about the Wilson house renovation through town gossip. "You don't have to do this," Rebecca said, overwhelmed by the unexpected support. "Sure we do," Linda replied matter-of-factly. "That's how small towns work. You'll do the same for someone else someday." As the impromptu work crew dispersed throughout the house, Rebecca caught Daniel's eye. "Did you organize this?" He shook his head. "Can't take credit. Mrs. Wilson called me this morning, said she'd been following your Instagram and thought the house needed all hands on deck today." He smiled. Apparently she made quite a few calls. Throughout the day, more people arrived, bringing tools, expertise, and food. Noah emerged from his initial shyness to proudly show visitors the treehouse renovation plans he'd been working on. Even Sophie ventured downstairs, eventually helping a local art teacher sort through salvageable materials from the basement. By evening, the power had been restored. Industrial fans were drying out the worst affected areas, the dead water heater had been removed, and the leaking windows temporarily sealed. What had seemed like an insurmountable disaster that morning now felt manageable. As the last of the helpers departed, promising to return the following weekend, Rebecca stood on the porch watching the sunset. The house behind her hummed with the sound of fans and dehumidifiers, evidence of damage but also of renewal. Daniel joined her, wiping his hands on a rag. "We made good progress today." Rebecca nodded. "I don't know how to thank everyone." "You could start by coming to the town festival next weekend," he suggested. "It would be a good opportunity to meet more people, maybe pick up some design clients." "A festival?" "Harvest Festival. It's a big deal around here. Craft booths, food vendors, local businesses showcasing their services. My contracting company always has a booth." He hesitated. "Actually, I was thinking, you mentioned needing more design work, and I've been wanting to update my company's logo and website. Maybe we could work out a trade, your design services for some of the more specialized renovation work you need." The offer was exactly what Rebecca needed, both professionally and financially. "That sounds perfect, actually." As Daniel left, Rebecca took out her phone and opened Instagram once more. She photographed the now crowded driveway, filled with trucks and cars from their community helpers, and typed, "24 hours ago, I thought we'd hit rock bottom. Today I learned that rock bottom is a foundation if you have the right people helping you build." To everyone who showed up today, thank you for reminding us what community means. That night, for the first time since they'd moved in, Rebecca fell asleep with a sense of hope stronger than her fears. The Harvest Festival transformed the small town's main street into a bustling marketplace. Colorful booths lined both sides of the road, the smell of kettle corn and apple cider donuts filling the air. Children dashed between hay bales and cornstalk decorations while local musicians played from a small stage in the town square. Rebecca stood behind a makeshift booth she shared with Daniel's contracting company. She'd spent the week creating new branding for his business, a clean, modern logo that maintained the warmth and trustworthiness his local reputation was built on. Around it, she displayed samples of her other design work and business cards featuring her new company name, Foundations Design Studio. "What do you think?" she asked Daniel as he returned with coffee for both of them. "I think you're going to be turning away clients by the end of the day," he replied, admiring the professional display. "The new logo looks even better printed than it did on screen." Noah darted up to the booth, his face painted like a tiger. "Mom, they have a wooden boat building contest for kids. Can I enter?" "Of course," Rebecca smiled, handing him a few dollars. "Where's your sister?" "Over there." Noah pointed across the square where Sophie stood talking to a girl about her age, both of them examining something on the other girl's phone. "She made a friend. Her name's Olivia and she's into art too." Rebecca tried not to look too surprised or pleased. Any reaction might send Sophie retreating back into her shell. "That's great, honey. Have fun with the boat building." As Noah dashed off, Daniel nudged Rebecca. "Looks like you have your first potential client headed this way." A woman in her 30s approached the booth, examining Rebecca's portfolio. "Are you the one renovating the old Wilson place? I've been following your Instagram." "That's me," Rebecca confirmed. Rebecca Taylor. I'm Jesse Miller. I own the bookstore down the block, Miller's Pages. We're long overdue for a website overhaul, and I love what you've done here. She gestured to Daniel's new branding materials. By midday, Rebecca had collected contact information from 6 potential clients: the bookstore, a local bakery, a bed and breakfast looking to attract more tourists, and several individuals interested in personal branding for their small businesses. "You're a hit," Daniel observed during a lull in foot traffic. "How does it feel to be the town's hot new designer?" Rebecca laughed. "Surreal. A month ago I was wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. Now it almost feels like it was meant to be." Speaking of meant to be, Daniel nodded toward the far end of the street. "Isn't that your daughter up on stage?" Rebecca turned to see Sophie standing with her new friend and several other teenagers near the small stage where musicians had been performing. After a brief announcement from the festival coordinator, Sophie stepped up to a microphone. "Hi," her voice echoed tentatively across the square. "I'm Sophie Taylor. My mom and I are renovating the old Wilson house, and while tearing down walls, we found some amazing artwork hidden behind the wallpaper. Mrs. Wilson Evelyn did these drawings decades ago, and they inspired me to start drawing again." She gestured to an easel beside her. "This is my first piece in a long time. It's called Uncovered." She unveiled a striking charcoal drawing of their house, not as it currently appeared, half renovated and rough, but as it might one day be, with light streaming from the windows and a family visible inside. Rebecca felt tears spring to her eyes. Sophie hadn't shown her the drawing, hadn't even mentioned she was working on art again. "The cool thing about renovation," Sophie continued, her voice growing stronger, "is that sometimes when you tear something down, you find something better underneath. I guess that can be true for families too, not just houses." She made brief eye contact with Rebecca across the crowd. "Anyway, thanks for letting me share." The audience applauded warmly as Sophie and the other young artists displayed their work. Rebecca wanted to rush over and hug her daughter, but she restrained herself, sensing that Sophie needed this moment of independence. "That's quite a girl you've got there," came a familiar voice beside her. Rebecca turned to find Mrs. Wilson, elegantly dressed and leaning on a cane. "Mrs. Wilson, I didn't know you'd be here today. Wouldn't miss the Harvest Festival. It's been a tradition for 70 years. The elderly woman nodded toward Sophie. "She's finding her way back to herself, just like you are." Rebecca smiled. "I think we all are. Thank you, by the way, for rallying the troops after the storm. I don't know what we would have done without everyone's help." "That wasn't me," Mrs. Wilson said with a twinkle in her eye. "That was the house." "The house?" "The Wilson house has always brought people together. It was a gathering place for decades. Dinner parties, community meetings, children's birthdays. The house remembers, even if the people sometimes forget." She patted Rebecca's hand. "You're restoring more than just walls and floors, my dear." Before Rebecca could respond, Noah came racing up, proudly displaying a small wooden boat painted in bright colors. "I got second place, Mom." "That's wonderful, honey. Did you make it all yourself?" Noah nodded enthusiastically. "Mr. Ortiz helped a little with the sanding, but I did the rest. The judge said my design was innovative." He turned to Mrs. Wilson. "Did you see Sophie's drawing? It's really good." "It certainly is," Mrs. Wilson agreed. "Both of you have hidden talents, it seems." "Noah's been redesigning the treehouse," Rebecca explained. "He's got quite an eye for structure." "Takes after his mother," Daniel commented, joining the conversation. "Good to see you, Mrs. Wilson. How's that loose porch railing I fixed for you holding up?" "Solid as a rock, Daniel. You always do fine work." Mrs. Wilson glanced between him and Rebecca with a knowing smile. "I should find myself a seat for the pie contest judging. Noah, would you be a gentleman and escort an old lady to the tent?" Noah proudly offered his arm, and the two set off across the square, leaving Rebecca and Daniel alone at the booth. "She's matchmaking," Rebecca said, feeling her cheeks warm slightly. Daniel laughed. "Mrs. Wilson has been trying to find me a wife for years. Don't take it personally." "I won't," Rebecca assured him, though something about his easy dismissal left her feeling oddly disappointed. The rest of the festival day passed in a pleasant blur. Sophie remained with her new friends, occasionally waving to Rebecca from across the square. Noah shuttled between the children's activities and the booth, bringing updates and samples of festival food. By closing time, Rebecca had lined up enough design projects to keep her busy and solvent for months. As they packed up the booth materials, Daniel asked, "Need help getting all this back to the house?" "That would be great," Rebecca nodded. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask your opinion about the kitchen renovation. Now that we've handled the emergency repairs, I'd like to start planning the next phase." Back at the house, with the children occupied in their respective spaces, Noah in the treehouse, Sophie in her room with her new friend Olivia, Rebecca spread kitchen design ideas across the dining table they'd recently salvaged from a thrift store. I'm torn between trying to restore the original 1930s style and going with something more modern but still compatible with the house's character, she explained, showing Daniel her sketches. He studied them thoughtfully. Both would work. The question is, what feels right to you? This is your home, after all. That's just it, Rebecca said, surprised by the emotion in her voice. It really is starting to feel like home. I didn't expect that to happen so quickly. Houses become homes when the right people live in them, Daniel replied. I've renovated dozens of properties, and you can always tell the difference between a house being flipped for profit and one being transformed with love. Rebecca looked up at him, struck by his insight. In the weeks since the storm, Daniel had become more than just a contractor. He was a friend, a confidant, someone who understood both the technical and emotional aspects of her renovation journey. Speaking of transformations, she said, changing the subject, the kids seem to be settling in better. Sophie's making friends, and Noah's becoming quite the junior carpenter thanks to you. Daniel smiled. They're great kids. Noah's got a natural talent for building things, and Sophie, well, that artwork today was impressive. I had no idea she was drawing again, Rebecca admitted. After the divorce, she stopped doing anything creative. It was like that part of her just shut down. Sometimes we need to tear down before we can rebuild, Daniel said, echoing Sophie's words from earlier. That applies to people as much as houses. Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Rebecca opened it to find a small crowd on her porch, led by Mrs. Wilson and including several people who had helped after the storm. We thought you might like some company for dinner, Mrs. Wilson announced. Everyone brought something. Behind her, neighbors held casserole dishes, salad bowls, and dessert platters. This is so thoughtful, Rebecca said, stepping back to let them in. But I'm afraid the dining room is still a work in progress. Not a problem, said one of the women, whom Rebecca recognized as the local librarian. We thought we'd eat in the backyard. It's a beautiful evening, and Jim brought his portable fire pit. Before Rebecca could process what was happening, her backyard had been transformed into an impromptu dinner party. Folding tables appeared, string lights were hung between trees, and the fire pit was set up in a cleared space near the treehouse. Noah helped arrange chairs while Sophie and Olivia were enlisted to set the tables. Daniel organized a makeshift outdoor serving area on the back porch. Within 30 minutes, it felt as though Rebecca had planned this gathering herself. As dusk fell, the backyard glowed with warm light. 20 people sat around the mismatched tables, passing dishes and sharing stories. Rebecca found herself seated between Mrs. Wilson and the high school art teacher who had taken an interest in Sophie's talent. Your daughter has real potential, the teacher, Miss Ramirez, told her. I've invited her to join our after-school art club. We meet twice a week. That's wonderful, Rebecca replied. I've been hoping she'd find an outlet here. Mrs. Wilson leaned closer. I brought something for you. She handed Rebecca a small wrapped package. Open it when you have a quiet moment. From the treehouse, laughter erupted as Noah showed his new friends the improvements he'd been planning. Sophie sat at the far end of the table, animated in conversation with Olivia and two other teenagers, looking more like her old self than Rebecca had seen in over a year. Daniel caught her eye from across the gathering and raised his glass in a subtle toast. Rebecca returned the gesture, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire pit. Later, after the guests had departed and the children had gone to bed, Rebecca sat alone on the back porch with Mrs. Wilson's gift. Carefully unwrapping it, she found a small framed watercolor painting of the house as it had looked in its prime, vibrant garden, welcoming porch, windows aglow with light. A note tucked into the frame read, "The house as it was, and as it will be again. Some places hold magic. They attract the right people at the right time. This house has been waiting for you, Rebecca. Evelyn." Rebecca held the painting in her lap, looking out at the yard now returned to darkness but still holding the echoes of laughter and conversation from earlier. For the first time since the divorce, she felt truly at peace with her decision to start over in this place. The following weeks brought steady progress on the house. With the emergency repairs behind them and Rebecca's design business building momentum, they were able to begin the more enjoyable aspects of renovation, choosing colors, designing spaces, making the house truly theirs. Sophie's room was completed first, with one wall preserved to showcase Evelyn's original drawings. The remaining walls were painted a soft blue-gray that Sophie had selected, and Rebecca had splurged on a window seat where her daughter could draw with natural light. Noah's room followed, with built-in shelving for his growing collection of model boats and construction vehicles. He had worked alongside Daniel to install the shelves, beaming with pride when they were perfectly level. The kitchen renovation began in earnest, with Rebecca opting for a blend of vintage charm and modern functionality. Original elements were restored where possible and complemented by new additions that respected the house's character. Throughout it all, their social media documentation continued, their follower count growing as people connected with the honest portrayal of both successes and setbacks. Rebecca found herself receiving messages from other divorced mothers, people undergoing renovations, and locals sharing memories of the Wilson house in its heyday. One evening, as November turned the air crisp and the last of the autumn leaves clung to the old oak tree, Rebecca sat on the newly restored front porch with Daniel, reviewing plans for the dining room. "I think we're actually ahead of schedule," she remarked, surprised by the realization. "At this rate, we might have the major renovations done by Christmas." Daniel nodded. "The community help has made a huge difference. Plus, you and the kids have learned fast. You're doing work now that I would have had to charge you for 2 months ago." "It's been good for all of us," Rebecca agreed. Noah's confidence has soared. And Sophie. She glanced through the window. Her daughter sat at the kitchen table, sketch pad open before her. Sophie's finding herself again. "And what about you?" Daniel asked quietly. "Are you finding yourself too?" Rebecca considered the question. "I think I'm finding a new self, someone stronger than I knew I could be," she smiled. "Turns out I'm pretty good with a power drill." "Among other things," Daniel added, "your design business is taking off. You've managed this renovation like a pro, and somehow you've kept it all together through storms both literal and metaphorical." "Not by myself," Rebecca pointed out. "I've had help. The kids, the community, Mrs. Wilson." She hesitated. "You." Their eyes met, and Rebecca felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in a long time, possibility. Not just for the house, but for herself. Daniel cleared his throat. "Speaking of the community, the Winter Lights Festival is coming up next month. It's another town tradition. Every house on Main Street gets decorated. There's a parade, hot chocolate." He hesitated. "I was wondering if you and the kids might want to go with me." "Like a date?" Rebecca asked, heart suddenly racing. "Like a family outing," Daniel clarified. "But yes, also like a date, if that's something you might be interested in." Before Rebecca could respond, Sophie pushed open the front door. "Mom, Mrs. Wilson is on the phone. She wants to know if we're still planning to host Thanksgiving here, or if it's too much with the renovation." Rebecca realized she'd forgotten all about her impulsive offer, made during the impromptu backyard dinner, to host Thanksgiving for their new friends. "Tell her yes, we're still on," Rebecca decided. "The dining room finished, but we'll make it work." As Sophie disappeared back inside, Rebecca turned to Daniel. "The Winter Lights Festival sounds wonderful. We'd love to go with you." His smile warmed her more than the porch's new space heater. "It's a date then, a family date." The phrase family date lingered in Rebecca's mind long after Daniel had gone home. Was that what they were becoming? A family of sorts? Not in the traditional sense, but something new and equally meaningful? She thought of how Noah looked up to Daniel, how Sophie had begun to share her artwork with him, seeking his opinion on colors for her room. She thought of the easy way he fit into their lives, bringing not just construction knowledge but patience, humor, and stability when they needed it most. It was too soon to put labels on whatever was developing between them, but like the house itself, their relationship had good bones, a solid foundation on which something beautiful might be built, given time and care. That night, Rebecca added to the growing house diary she'd started keeping, inspired by the original from the Wilsons. "Today I realized that home isn't just about having a roof over your head. It's about creating a space where healing can happen, where new beginnings are possible. This old house is teaching us that broken doesn't mean beyond repair for buildings or for people." The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving flew by in a blur of painting, sanding, and finishing touches. The dining room had become the focal point of their efforts, a space large enough to accommodate the 15 guests Rebecca had impulsively invited for the holiday. Original wainscoting had been carefully restored, walls painted a warm sage green above it. The massive oak table that had come with the house had been refinished by Daniel and Rebecca over several evenings, their conversation flowing as easily as the Danish oil they worked into the wood. Sophie had created artwork for the walls, not just her own pieces, but carefully framed selections of Evelyn's original drawings that they'd discovered throughout the house. Noah had built a centerpiece with wood salvaged from the renovation, a miniature version of the Wilson house that would hold candles for the Thanksgiving table. The night before Thanksgiving, Rebecca stood in the nearly completed dining room, mentally reviewing her checklist. The kitchen renovation wasn't finished, but it was functional enough for holiday cooking. The living room still needed work, but the dining room, downstairs bathroom, and entrance hall were ready for company. "Mom?" Noah appeared in the doorway, wearing pajamas and clutching a tablet. "Can I show you something?" Rebecca sat on one of the newly reupholstered dining chairs, patting the seat beside her. "Of course, honey. What is it?" Noah settled next to her, opening a presentation app on his tablet. "It's my school project. We had to create something about home and what it means to us." He started the slideshow, which began with a photo of their old house in the city. "This was our first home," Noah narrated. "It was nice, but after Mom and Dad decided not to be married anymore, it didn't feel like home should feel." Rebecca's throat tightened as Noah advanced to the next slide, a photo of the Wilson house the day they arrived, dilapidated and unwelcoming in the rain. "This is our new house when we first saw it," Noah continued. "It looks scary and broken. I didn't think it could ever be a home." The next series of slides showed the renovation process, the roof repair, the treehouse reconstruction, the community work day after the storm. Photos of Daniel teaching Noah how to use tools, of Sophie uncovering the wall drawings, of Rebecca painting the kitchen cabinets late into the night. But then something amazing happened. Noah's narration continued. "We started fixing the broken parts, and as we fixed the house, something else got fixed too." The final slide showed a recent photo Rebecca had taken for their social media, the three of them plus Daniel on the front porch, all smiling, the house behind them looking increasingly charming with its new paint and restored details. "This is our home now," Noah concluded. "It's not perfect yet, but it's getting better every day, like us." Rebecca pulled her son into a tight hug, blinking back tears. "That's beautiful, Noah. I think it's your best project ever." "Miss Patterson said I should add more about the historical aspects of the house," Noah said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. "But I thought the people part was more important." "The people part is always more important," Rebecca agreed, kissing the top of his head. "The house is just the shell that holds us." From the doorway came a soft sound. Rebecca looked up to find Sophie watching them, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "That was a good presentation, Squirt," she told her brother with gruff affection. "Thanks." Noah beamed at the rare compliment from his sister. "Want to see the animation I added for the final version?" As Noah showed Sophie his project, Rebecca slipped away to the kitchen. The emotional moment had reminded her how far they'd come in just a few months. From that first rainy night of regret to now preparing to host Thanksgiving in their partially renovated but increasingly beautiful home. She began pulling out ingredients for the pies she planned to bake early the next morning. The kitchen still had exposed subfloor in places, and the new island was only partially installed, but the vintage stove had been restored to working order, and the freshly painted cabinets brightened the space considerably. A knock at the back door surprised her. Through the window, she could see Daniel standing on the porch, holding something large and wrapped in a drop cloth. "Late delivery," he explained when she opened the door. "I wanted to get this installed before tomorrow." "What is it?" Rebecca asked, as he carefully maneuvered the wrapped object into the kitchen. "A housewarming gift, or maybe a pre-Thanksgiving gift." Daniel set it against the wall and pulled away the cloth to reveal a stunning piece of stained glass, a window panel featuring a craftsman-style design in amber green and blue tones. "Daniel, it's beautiful," Rebecca breathed, running her fingers over the smooth glass pieces. "Where did you find it?" "I made it," he admitted with a hint of shyness. "It's a hobby of mine. I thought it might look good in that transom window above the front door. The measurements should be exact." Rebecca was speechless. The window was not only beautiful but perfectly matched the house's architectural style and the color palette they'd chosen for the renovation. "You made this? For us?" Daniel nodded. "I started it after the storm. Something about how you refused to give up on this place, even when it was literally underwater. It inspired me." Rebecca impulsively wrapped her arms around him. "Thank you. It's the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given us." Daniel returned the embrace, his work-roughened hands gentle on her back. "You're welcome," he murmured into her hair. They stood that way for a long moment before the sound of footsteps on the stairs broke them apart. "Is that a stained glass window?" Sophie asked, entering the kitchen with Noah close behind. "Daniel made it for our house," Rebecca explained, her cheeks warm. "That is so cool," Noah declared, examining the craftsmanship. "Can you teach me how to make these?" Daniel laughed. "It takes practice, but sure. Maybe we can start with something small after the holidays." "It matches the colors in my mural," Sophie observed, referring to the design she'd been painting in the upstairs hallway, an artistic family tree that incorporated elements from both the house's history and their own. "Great minds think alike," Daniel told her with a wink. Together, the four of them carried the window to the front entrance. Daniel had brought the necessary tools, and within an hour, the stained glass was installed in the transom space, catching the last light of the evening and casting colored patterns across the refinished floor. "It's like the final puzzle piece," Rebecca said, standing back to admire the effect. Now the house finally looks the way it was meant to. That night, after Daniel had gone and the kids were in bed, Rebecca stood alone in the quiet house, taking in how far they'd come. The sagging porch had been rebuilt, the leaking roof replaced, the rotting floors restored. Light switches worked, water flowed from faucets without alarming noises, and heat circulated evenly through the radiators. But more importantly, laughter echoed in the halls again. Sophie's art adorned the walls. Noah's projects occupied the workshop area created in a corner of the garage. And Rebecca had found not just a career renaissance but a new sense of capability and strength. Thanksgiving morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect late November weather. Rebecca rose early to begin cooking, only to find Sophie already in the kitchen, apron on, pie dough rolled out on the counter. "I couldn't sleep," her daughter explained. "I thought I'd get started on the pie. Grandma used to let me help with the crimping." Rebecca felt a wave of emotion, remembering holidays past when Sophie and her mother had baked together. It was a tradition that had fallen by the wayside during the troubled final years of her marriage. "I'd love the help," Rebecca said simply, tying on her own apron. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, the familiar rhythm of baking bringing them closer than any conversation could have. When Noah appeared an hour later, he was put in charge of setting the dining table, a responsibility he took with surprising seriousness, carefully arranging the mismatched vintage china they'd collected from thrift stores. By noon, the house was filled with delicious aromas and the first guests were arriving. Mrs. Wilson came early, bearing an heirloom serving platter and a weathered cookbook. "My grandmother's recipes," she explained, handing the book to Rebecca. "I thought they should stay with the house." Daniel arrived with his sister and her family. Neighbors and new friends followed, each bringing food and stories to share. The dining room filled with conversation and laughter, the table crowded but cozy, the house seemingly expanding to embrace them all. Before they ate, Rebecca stood at the head of the table, suddenly emotional at the sight before her, this collection of people who had become so important to their lives in such a short time. "I want to thank everyone for coming today," she began. "A few months ago, when we first arrived at this house, I wasn't sure we'd ever feel at home here. The renovation seemed impossible, and starting over felt overwhelming." She glanced at her children, then at Daniel, and finally at Mrs. Wilson. "But you all showed us that impossible just means you haven't found the right help yet." She raised her glass. "To new beginnings, to old houses with good bones, and to the people who help us rebuild when life tears down our walls." "Here, here," came the response around the table, glasses raised in return. As the meal progressed, Rebecca found herself watching her children. Sophie engaged in animated conversation with Mrs. Wilson about art schools, Noah demonstrating his latest woodworking techniques to Daniel's nephews. They were thriving in ways she couldn't have imagined that first rainy night. After dinner, while pie was being served, Mrs. Wilson beckoned Rebecca into the living room. "I have something else for you," the elderly woman said, reaching into her handbag. "Sitting in my apartment all these years, but it belongs here." She withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in Rebecca's palm. Inside was an antique brass key. "The original key to the front door," Mrs. Wilson explained. "Arthur had it made into a necklace for me on our 40th anniversary. I'd like you to have it now." "Evelyn, I couldn't possibly." Mrs. Wilson closed Rebecca's fingers around the key. "The house has chosen you. I've known it from the moment you arrived. This house needed a family that understood what it means to be broken and repaired, a family that could appreciate its scars and imperfections." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you for everything. Your friendship has meant so much to us, to me." Mrs. Wilson patted her hand. "Margaret would be proud of you. She always said you had grit, even as a little girl." She glanced toward the dining room, where Daniel was helping Noah serve pie to the guests. "And she would approve of that young man. He has good honest eyes." Rebecca felt herself blushing. "We're just friends. It's too soon for anything else." "At my age, my dear, nothing seems too soon anymore," Mrs. Wilson chuckled. "When the right person comes along, you recognize it. It's like finding the perfect house that speaks to your soul." Later that evening, as the last guests were departing, Rebecca stood on the front porch with Daniel, watching the sunset cast long shadows across their newly landscaped yard. "It was a perfect day," she said softly. "I didn't know I could feel this content again." Daniel nodded, his shoulder just touching hers as they leaned against the porch railing. "You've created something special here, Rebecca. Not just the renovation, but a home, a community." "We created it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done this without you." Their eyes met, and in that moment, Rebecca felt the last broken piece of her heart begin to mend. Not erasing the past, but building something new upon it, just as they had done with the house. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel gently took her hand. The Winter Lights Festival is next weekend, our first official family date. Rebecca smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. I'm looking forward to it. Inside, Sophie was playing the piano. They'd recently restored a skill she hadn't practiced since before the divorce. Noah's laughter echoed from the kitchen where he was helping Mrs. Wilson pack up leftover pie. Through the new stained glass window above the door, the fading sunlight cast jewel-toned patterns across the entryway floor. Rebecca looked up at the house, their house now transformed from a neglected structure into a vibrant home. The exterior paint gleamed soft white with sage green trim. The porch welcomed with its comfortable chairs and potted evergreens. Warm light spilled from every window, no longer obscured by boards or plastic sheeting. It's not just a renovation, Rebecca realized aloud. It's a restoration of the house, of us. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. That's the thing about old houses with good bones. They're never really broken beyond repair. They're just waiting for someone with enough love and patience to help them shine again. As they stood together on the porch of the Wilson house, now the Taylor house, Rebecca felt the truth of his words settle into her soul. Some things couldn't be fixed, but others could be transformed, rebuilt, and made stronger than before. The renovation wasn't complete. There would always be another project, another improvement to make. But the most important work was done. They had built more than a house. They had created a home. If there's one thing the Wilson house has taught us, it's that broken doesn't mean beyond repair. Sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin with the courage to tear down what isn't working and start fresh. What in your life needs renovation? What walls are you afraid to tear down? What foundation are you building your future upon? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've enjoyed this story of renovation and renewal, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us of our capacity to rebuild, restore, and begin again. Until next time, remember that home isn't just where you live, it's where you find yourself again.